Hi, Dr. Morrison here, and welcome to Towards Reconciliation Framework. This is the first of two videos for this week of October 13th, with some exercises that are due on October 20th. Just a word of warning, the workload for this week is a little bit heavier than it is for most weeks, reflecting the weight of the social responsibility that we all share in this area. Here are the learning outcomes for this week. A basic understanding of the ethical and legal responsibilities of information professionals arising from the Truth and Reconciliation's 2015 calls to action. And you'll be demonstrating this through a brief personal reflection. Respecting Canada's Indigenous peoples by actively listening, in this case, reading or browsing their voices, their governments, their experts. Understand the ongoing response of information professions beyond the legal requirements. We'll be practicing teamwork and collaboration skills, in this case through a collaborative online learning exercise using a Google Doc. Demonstrating basic online writing skills and the individual reflection written exercise that you'll do at the end of the week. A really brief description of post-colonialism, just in case anyone is not familiar with this. As Iveson describes it, it's a historical period or state of affairs representing the aftermath of Western colonialism. So here in what it is now called North America, and has been called for many thousands of years Turtle Island by the people who have lived here for a very long period of time. We had a period of European colonization, and we now have North America, which is Canada, the US, and Mexico. So just an acknowledgement that there were people here before the colonial period began. Okay, this covers centuries of history in one slide. Just a little bit about the history of colonization, which happened in different ways in different places, but some of the impacts for Canada's Indigenous peoples. It's a long and complex history, and not all the relationships were bad ones initially. When Europeans came over, they established trade relationships, they had war relationships, so some of the Indigenous peoples fought with some of the colonizing peoples for some time, and there was a process of development and signing of treaties, which has never been complete. So some of the First Nations in British Columbia today, actually most of them still haven't signed treaties. There's many examples of historical and current negative impacts on Indigenous peoples, which includes massive population loss due to smallpox and tuberculosis, which were not endemic here, losses of land and this month, as was reported on CBC, while she was lying there dying, people were making extremely racist comments about her. If you pay attention to the news, and if you haven't been, I encourage you to do so, any of the mainstream news sources, unfortunately, you'll see that these kinds of incidents are not unique. Beyond this course and this program, I encourage everybody to learn more about Canada's history and our current relationship with the Indigenous peoples. But for 1 week, there are certain basics that we need to know, and we can't cover it all. So we're going to focus on the truth and reconciliation process for two reasons. One is that there are specific actions for information professions, and the other is that I find the idea of reconciliation is rich in that it offers us a way forward. Just a wee bit of background, and to get more of the history, you should go to the TRC website. Canada's residential school system involved the government, in collusion with the churches, taking Indigenous children from their families and communities with the goal of assimilation, and it was a matter of government policy. Okay, so not just little incidents here and there, it was systemic. The kids were forbidden to use their language or practice their cultural traditions. Many were abused and or died, never returned home. The survivors of the residential school system brought a class action lawsuit and they won. And what did they win? They won a combination of financial compensation and, through their request, a government commitment to the process of reconciliation. So I'm going to go over briefly a few of the things from the readings for today. And you should go back and do all of the readings here. They aren't that long. And I'm adding emphases, particular things that matter particularly to this particular week's class. Okay, from the introduction, page 5. And here, this is just to record that this is a formal process that came from a class action lawsuit which the residential school survivors won. And it's stating that the central goals of Canada's Aboriginal policy was assimilation. That is, to cause the Aboriginal peoples of Canada to cease to exist as distinct legal, social, cultural, religious, and racial entities. And that this process, and this is their term, is cultural genocide. So this is just to talk a little bit about citation practice here. This is a good example of where you might want to use quotes rather than paraphrasing things, because it is a powerful statement that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission actually used the term cultural genocide. So it's not our interpretation, it's what they said. Okay, so they're talking about the, okay, we're going into the principles now, and I'm adding the emphases to each principle, the things important for us to keep in mind. Principle 1, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People is the framework. So if you're doing a term paper on this topic, that's a really good resource to look at. The second principle is to recognize that these are the original peoples of this country. They are self-determining peoples, and they have rights. Okay, so we're not doing reconciliation in order to just be nicer, be a better person. It is recognizing the people's actual rights. Principle 3 gets into the process. It's about the healing of relationships. So that's important context for the exercise, the collaborative online learning that we're going to do. It's to help us to prepare as information professionals and as professors for me to be part of that healing process. The next principle talks about the need for constructive action. So it's not enough to say, okay, things are pretty bad, we need to move towards reconciliation. We have to actually do things. And for this week, you guys have to actually do things that will help move us towards reconciliation, in my opinion. Principle 5 goes into one of the goals, that we need to create a more equitable and inclusive society. Good fit with the values of the information professionals, as this class will know very well. 6 talks about who's are responsible for reconciliation, and it's all of us. All Canadians share responsibility. If you look at the TRC, the readings for today, there's a section there for newcomers. So just because you weren't coming here during the process of colonial settlement, it doesn't mean that this has nothing to do with you. It's for everybody in Canada. Okay, and this may help to understand part of the browsings for this week and part of the exercise this week to listen to the voices of Aboriginal peoples is this principle that the perspectives and understandings of the Aboriginal elders and traditional knowledge keepers are vital in this process. So it's important to understand it's not just the academics, the Western style authorities that we need to engage with the traditional knowledge and their keepers as well. Hey, Principle 8, supporting Aboriginal people's cultural revitalization and integrating Indigenous knowledge systems is very much part of this. So recovering from this attempt to assimilate, a lot of Indigenous peoples are going through the process of relearning their languages and their cultures, and that's all part of that. And that could be part of your contribution to the collaborative online learning. If you know of cultural things that people are doing, and you can contribute those to the Google Doc. Okay, Principle 9 acknowledges that it takes not just political will, but also a substantial investment of resources, which is one of the reasons why we are putting some of our resources into these exercises this week. Okay, so even though I, as a professor, did not have an education about the Canada's Aboriginal peoples that would really support my teaching in this area, I have a responsibility to learn in order to teach, and you guys have a responsibility to learn, or to learn more if you already know some. And finally, reconciliation requires sustained public education and dialogue, and that's part of what this exercise for this week is all about, is the education process and helping you to be prepared for an education process that could happen in your career. Now, where might this intersect with your career as a professional? In many ways. There are many people who will be working actively in the areas of reconciliation, of decolonizing in many ways, in some cases working directly with First Nations people, with their own knowledge and with their artifacts in Library and Archives Canada and museums, that kind of thing. But even if that's not part of your world at all of us are needing to deal with bringing people into that inclusive society, that equitable society, and thinking about things like our hiring practices, even if our, and moving towards equity in that, even if we're not directly dealing with Indigenous knowledge and that kind of thing. So it's for everybody. Okay, so just a quick overview of the exercise or exercises for this week. One is to listen to, put listening in quotes because we're not necessarily listening, although we might be, to and learn about Indigenous peoples by reading and browsing their websites. To learn together through light research, and I'll go over this in more detail in the next video, and sharing our results in a collaborative online writing exercise, and to reflect on your own journey in the process of reconciliation through a brief personal reflection. And this is less than 300 words, and by personal I mean whatever personal information you feel comfortable sharing. Okay, so there's one more slide here, the references slide after this. So what do you do after this? First of all, you should read the TRC Introduction, Principles, and Calls to Action. That's all in the course outline. If colonialism, post-colonialism isn't something that was covered in your undergrad, then you should read the Iveson as well, just a really quick introduction to what that's about. Then you should browse the website. So this is the listening part. Just go look through the different sections and see what's there and think about how you can learn from these. So there's the Chiefs of Ontario. So I've used this in developing my teaching practice because I was never taught in school about the First Nations peoples here in Ontario. So in order to learn like who are the people, who's here, and to help the students to think about some of those groups who are far up north, perhaps in communities that you only fly in that I would never drop into, I've been able to go to this website and get connected to information about these peoples in order to advance my knowledge in order to teach. It's the Assembly of First Nations, the Métis National Council, and in the course outline I had the wrong URL for this, but it's the Inuit Tapirit Kanatami. Okay, so first just go check around the website and then begin the exercises, and there's written instructions for this, and there's a video to kind of walk you through the process, and if you have questions, there's a Zoom Tuesday afternoon at 2:30 or a book an appointment. So here's your reference slide. So go and happy readings and browsing, and then come back and watch the second video, read the instructions, and then we'll be sharing the collaborative online learning exercise together.